Marcus Thompson had always been told he was crazy, but walking through the reinforced titanium doors of Section 7 Alpha at the Galactic Military Academy felt like the definition of insanity. The corridor beyond those doors was known throughout the galaxy as the Viper's Den, home to Class Phoenix, 37 of the most lethal female cadets ever assembled in one unit. The mortality rate for instructors assigned to this class stood at 43%. The psychological breakdown rate was even higher. But Marcus wasn't just any instructor. At 28, he was the youngest combat specialist ever recruited by the Academy, a former Earth Special Forces operative who had survived the siege of New Jakarta and the Martian uprising. What made him truly unique, however, wasn't his military record. It was his unshakable optimism and his genuine smile that seemed to disarm even the most hardened warriors. The Academy's commandant, General Patricia Vance, had personally briefed him on what he was walking into. Class Phoenix wasn't just dangerous because of their combat skills. Though each cadet could kill a grown man with her bare hands in 17 different ways. They were dangerous because they had been systematically broken and rebuilt by previous instructors who believed that emotional suppression was the key to creating perfect soldiers. The result was a group of young women who trusted no one, questioned everything, and had developed a collective hatred for authority figures that bordered on the pathological. "They've gone through 12 instructors in 2 years," General Vance had warned him. The last one, Colonel Harrison, lasted exactly 47 minutes before requesting immediate transfer. The one before that ended up in psychiatric care for 6 months. "Are you absolutely certain about this assignment, Thompson?" Marcus had simply smiled, that same genuine, warm smile that had gotten him through every hellish situation he'd ever faced. "Ma'am, with respect, I didn't survive 3 tours in the Outer Rim by backing down from challenges. Besides, someone needs to show these young women that not every authority figure is their enemy." Now, standing before the classroom door, Marcus could hear the low murmur of conversation from within. According to his briefing files, the cadets would already know he was coming. They made it their business to know everything about everyone who entered their domain. They would have researched his background, analyzed his weaknesses, and prepared their psychological warfare tactics accordingly. Marcus straightened his uniform, checked his tablet containing the lesson plan he'd spent weeks preparing, and opened the door. The conversation stopped instantly. 37 pairs of eyes, representing 12 different species from across the galaxy, fixed on him with varying degrees of hostility, curiosity, and calculation. The silence was so complete that Marcus could hear the hum of the air recycling system. The classroom itself was arranged in a perfect amphitheater, with the cadets seated in ascending rows that gave each of them a clear line of sight to both the instructor's position and all exits. It was a defensive formation that spoke to their collective paranoia and tactical thinking. At the center of the front row sat Cadet Zara Williams, A tall, athletic human woman with steel-gray eyes and platinum blonde hair pulled back in a regulation bun. She was the unofficial leader of Class Phoenix, a position she'd earned through a combination of superior combat skills and an intellect that had tested in the 99th percentile across all metrics. To her right sat Cadet Riley Anderson, a petite redhead whose deceptively fragile appearance concealed reflexes fast enough to catch a plasma bolt mid-flight. Her specialty was demolitions, and rumor had it she could build an explosive device from common household items in under 5 minutes. To Zara's left was Cadet Jessica Chen. Marcus mentally corrected himself, checking his roster. Cadet Jessica Martinez, a tactical genius whose strategic simulations had been adopted by the Academy's War College curriculum. The alien cadets were equally impressive and intimidating. Cadet Tivara, a Vulcan-like species with blue-tinted skin and enhanced telepathic abilities, sat with perfect posture in the third row, her mental shields so strong that even the Academy's psychic instructors couldn't penetrate them. Next to her was Cadet Zixara, a reptilian saurian whose species was known for their predatory instincts and ability to move with deadly silence. Marcus had memorized every file, every psychological profile, every incident report. He knew that Cadet Williams had been orphaned at age 12 when pirates attacked her colony ship, leaving her with severe trust issues and a pathological need to control her environment. He knew that Cadet Anderson had watched her entire family die in a terrorist bombing, which explained her expertise with explosives and her habit of analyzing every room for potential threats. Each of these young women carried trauma that would have destroyed lesser individuals, but instead had forged them into weapons of incredible precision and lethality. What the previous instructors had failed to understand was that beneath all that armor, all that anger and suspicion, were brilliant young women who had simply never been given a reason to trust. They had been treated as problems to be solved, weapons to be calibrated, rather than people to be understood. Marcus walked to the center of the room, set his tablet on the instructor's desk, and did something that no previous instructor had ever done. He sat down on the edge of the desk, adopting a casual posture that immediately broke the formal instructor-student dynamic that the cadets were accustomed to. Then he smiled, not the practiced, professional smile of a military instructor, but the genuine, warm expression that had gotten him through every impossible situation in his life. "Good morning, ladies," he said, his voice carrying none of the authoritative bark that military instructors typically employed. "I'm Marcus Thompson, and I'm genuinely excited to be working with you." The reaction was immediate and varied. Several cadets exchanged glances that clearly communicated their disbelief. Cadet Williams' eyes narrowed as she attempted to identify the angle Marcus was playing. Cadet Anderson's hand instinctively moved toward the concealed blade that Marcus knew she kept strapped to her thigh. The alien cadets began subtle communication through their various enhanced senses, sharing information and assessments in ways that most humans couldn't detect. But Marcus had expected this reaction. In fact, he was counting on it. "I know what you're thinking," he continued, his smile never wavering. "Here comes another instructor who thinks he can waltz in here and tame the legendary class Phoenix. Another authority figure who sees you as problems to be solved rather than people to be understood. Another military hard case who believes that breaking you down is the first step to building you up." The silence in the room deepened, but Marcus could sense a shift in the quality of attention he was receiving. He had their curiosity now, even if their suspicion remained intact. "Well, you're partially right. I am another authority figure, and I do represent the military establishment that has, frankly, failed you repeatedly. But I'm not here to break you down, because honestly, you've already been broken enough. I'm not here to solve you like mathematical equations, because you're not problems, you're solutions. And I'm definitely not here to make you into something you're not, because what you already are is absolutely extraordinary." Cadet Williams leaned forward slightly, her expression shifting from hostile suspicion to wary interest. Several other cadets mirrored her movement, creating a ripple effect throughout the classroom. Marcus stood up from the desk and began walking slowly around the room, making eye contact with each cadet as he spoke. "I've read your files, all of them, not just the military assessments and psychological profiles, but everything. Your backgrounds, your histories, your losses." His voice softened as he continued. "I know about New Harmony Colony, Zara. I know about the bombing on Luna Station, Riley. I know why you volunteered for the most dangerous assignment in the galaxy, Jessica." The use of their first names, something no previous instructor had ever done, sent another shock wave through the room. Military protocol demanded the use of ranks and surnames, but Marcus was deliberately breaking that protocol to establish a different kind of relationship. "I also know your capabilities," he continued, completing his circuit of the room and returning to the front. "Cadet Williams, your hand-to-hand combat scores are the highest in Academy history. Cadet Anderson, your demolitions work is being studied by tactical experts across 3 sectors. Cadet Martinez, your strategic simulations have been implemented in actual combat situations with remarkable success." He paused, looking around the room at faces that were now showing genuine interest rather than hostility. "Every single one of you is operating at a level that most military personnel will never achieve. You're not just cadets, you're already elite warriors. The question isn't whether you're good enough for the Academy. The question is whether the Academy is good enough for you." For the first time since he'd entered the room, Marcus heard something other than silence. There was a subtle intake of breath from multiple cadets, the soft creak of chairs as postures shifted, the barely audible whisper of fabric as hands moved away from concealed weapons. "So here's what we're going to do," Marcus said, his smile broadening. "We're going to throw out everything you've been taught about instructor-student relationships. We're going to ignore the traditional military hierarchy that says I give orders and you follow them without question. Instead, we're going to work together to figure out how to make you even more effective than you already are." Cadet Williams finally broke the silence. "And why would you do that?" Her voice was carefully modulated, revealing nothing of her thoughts or emotions. "What's your angle, Thompson?" Marcus's smile never wavered as he met her gaze directly. "My angle, Cadet Williams, is that I believe you and your classmates are going to save the galaxy someday. And when that day comes, I want to make sure you're prepared not just to fight, but to win." The silence that followed was different from the hostile quiet that had greeted his arrival. This was the silence of calculation, of possibilities being considered, of 37 brilliant minds reassessing their initial judgments. Marcus had taken the first step into the most dangerous classroom in the galaxy. And for the first time in Class Phoenix's history, the instructor was still smiling. The rest of that first day passed in a blur of careful verbal sparring and cautious exploration. Marcus had structured his lesson plan around practical combat scenarios rather than theoretical military doctrine, understanding that Class Phoenix learned best when they could see immediate applications for the information being presented. "Today's scenario," Marcus announced, pulling up a holographic display of a space station under siege, "is based on the Battle of Kepler Station 3 months ago. Intelligence suggests that a similar situation may arise in the near future, and Command wants to know how Class Phoenix would handle it." This was a lie, but it was a strategic lie. There was no pending mission, but by framing the exercise as a real-world application rather than a training simulation, Marcus had immediately engaged their professional pride and tactical instincts. Cadet Williams studied the holographic display with intense concentration. Standard assault doctrine would call for a frontal assault on the main docking bays, followed by a systematic room-by-room clearing operation. "And why is that approach flawed?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious to hear her analysis. "Because it's predictable," Cadet Anderson interjected, her demolitions expertise already identifying potential complications. "The defenders will have fortified the obvious entry points. We'd be walking into prepared kill zones." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Exactly. So what's your alternative approach?" What followed was a masterclass in tactical innovation. The cadets began building on each other's ideas, their individual specialties combining into a comprehensive assault plan that was both brilliant and terrifying. Cadet Martinez identified weaknesses in the station's power grid that could be exploited to create confusion. Cadet Tivara suggested using her telepathic abilities to coordinate silent communications between assault teams. Cadet Zixara proposed infiltration routes through the station's ventilation systems that would bypass the main defenses entirely. As Marcus watched them work, he began to understand why previous instructors had found Class Phoenix so intimidating. It wasn't just their individual skills. It was their collective intelligence and their ability to synthesize complex information at superhuman speed. When they worked together, they were less like a military unit and more like a single, incredibly sophisticated organism. But he also saw something that the previous instructors had missed. Beneath their tactical brilliance and emotional armor, these young women were starving for recognition and respect. Every time Marcus acknowledged a particularly clever insight or built upon one of their suggestions, he could see them straighten slightly, their eyes brightening with something that looked suspiciously like hope. The class period ended with the cadets having developed an assault plan that was so innovative and effective that Marcus made a mental note to forward it to command for actual consideration. As they filed out of the classroom, their conversations were animated in a way that suggested genuine enthusiasm rather than mere professional competence. All except Cadet Williams, who lingered behind as the others left. "You're not what we expected," she said without preamble, her steel-gray eyes studying Marcus with clinical precision. "What did you expect?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious. "Another Colonel Harrison. Another instructor who saw us as a problem to be solved rather than soldiers to be trained." She paused, her expression revealing a hint of vulnerability before the armor snapped back into place. "Another authority figure who would try to break us down and rebuild us in his own image." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "And what would you have done if I had been another Colonel Harrison?" For the first time since he'd met her, Zara Williams smiled. It wasn't the warm, genuine expression that Marcus wore so easily. It was something sharper, more predatory. "We would have eaten you alive, Thompson, just like we did all the others." But you didn't," Marcus observed. "Why?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to solve a puzzle that didn't have an obvious answer. "Because you smiled," she said finally. "When you walked into this room, you looked at us like we were people instead of problems, like we were assets instead of liabilities." She paused, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Like we were worth saving instead of just worth using." Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. He had read the psychological profiles, understood intellectually what these young women had endured, but hearing it expressed so directly by someone who had lived it was entirely different. "You are worth saving," he said simply. "All of you. Not because of your tactical value or your combat effectiveness, but because you're human beings who deserve to be treated with dignity and respect." Williams studied him for another long moment, then nodded once. A sharp, military acknowledgement that seemed to carry more weight than a dozen formal salutes. "We'll see, Thompson, we'll see." After she left, Marcus remained in the empty classroom for several minutes, processing what had just occurred. He had managed to survive his first encounter with the most dangerous class in the galaxy, but he understood that this was just the beginning. Earning their attention was one thing, earning their trust would be something else entirely. But as he gathered his materials and prepared to leave, Marcus found himself genuinely excited about the challenge ahead. For the first time in his military career, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. And he was still smiling. Word of Marcus's successful first day with Class Phoenix spread through the academy with the speed of a quantum transmission. By the time he reached his quarters that evening, his personal communicator was flashing with 17 messages from fellow instructors who wanted to know how he had managed to survive his initial encounter with the legendary cadets. But the message that caught his attention was from General Vance herself, requesting an immediate debrief in her office. Marcus found the commandant waiting for him behind her massive desk, her expression unreadable as she gestured for him to take a seat. General Patricia Vance was a legend in her own right, a career military officer who had risen through the ranks during the darkest period of the Galactic War. She was known for her strategic brilliance, her unwavering dedication to the academy, and her complete intolerance for failure. "Thompson," she began without preamble, "I've been receiving reports about your first class with Phoenix Section. Care to explain how you managed to complete a full lesson plan without requiring emergency medical attention or psychiatric evaluation?" Marcus had expected this question and had prepared his answer carefully. "Ma'am, I approached the assignment differently than previous instructors. Instead of trying to establish dominance or break down their existing group dynamics, I focused on recognizing their capabilities and treating them as the elite soldiers they already are." General Vance leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled as she studied Marcus with the same clinical intensity that Cadet Williams had displayed. "And you believe this approach will be sustainable over the long term?" "I believe it's the only approach that has a chance of success," Marcus replied honestly. "These cadets have been systematically mistreated by authority figures throughout their lives. Traditional military instruction methods that rely on breaking down ego and rebuilding obedience simply reinforce their existing trauma patterns." "Trauma patterns," General Vance repeated, her tone suggesting that she found the phrase either amusing or irritating. "Thompson, these aren't therapy patients, they're weapons. Extremely effective weapons that need to be properly calibrated and deployed." Marcus felt his smile falter for the first time since entering the academy. "With respect, ma'am, they're young women who have already sacrificed more than most people sacrifice in entire lifetimes. They deserve to be treated as human beings, not just as military assets." The silence that followed was long enough for Marcus to wonder if he had just ended his career with a single statement. General Vance was known for her pragmatic approach to military operations, and his idealistic perspective might be seen as a dangerous liability. But when she finally spoke, her voice carried a note of something that might have been approval. "Thompson, do you know why I personally selected you for this assignment?" "No, ma'am." Because every other qualified instructor approached Class Phoenix as a problem to be solved. You're the first one who seems to understand that they might actually be the solution we've been looking for. She leaned forward, her expression intensifying. The truth is, we're facing threats that conventional military thinking can't address. We need soldiers who can think outside established parameters, who can operate effectively without traditional command structures, who can make split-second decisions in situations that would paralyze normal military personnel. Marcus nodded, beginning to understand the broader context of his assignment. Class Phoenix represents the evolution of military thinking, General Vance continued. They're not just elite soldiers, they're the prototype for an entirely new kind of warrior. But previous instructors have been trying to force them into traditional military molds instead of helping them develop their unique capabilities. And you believe my approach will be more effective. I believe your approach is the only one that hasn't failed spectacularly, General Vance said with something that might have been humor. But Thompson, I need you to understand something. These cadets aren't just your students. They're potentially the most important military asset in the galaxy. The threats we're facing require soldiers who can operate at levels that conventional forces simply cannot achieve. She stood up and moved to the window overlooking the academy's training grounds, where hundreds of cadets were engaged in various military exercises. What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. We have intelligence suggesting that the hegemony is developing weapons systems that could render conventional military tactics obsolete. When that happens, unconventional forces like Class Phoenix may be our only hope for survival. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. The stakes of his assignment had just increased exponentially. Ma'am, what exactly are you asking me to do? General Vance turned back to face him, her expression grave. I'm asking you to help them become everything they're capable of becoming, not just individually, but as a unit. Because if our intelligence is correct, they may be called upon to save not just the academy, not just the military, but civilization itself. The conversation ended with Marcus receiving additional security clearances and access to classified training materials that would help him understand the true scope of his mission. As he made his way back to his quarters, his mind raced with the implications of what he had learned. Class Phoenix wasn't just the most dangerous class in the galaxy. They were potentially the most important. And somehow, against all odds and expectations, they had been placed under his guidance. Marcus Thompson had always been told he was crazy. But as he prepared for his second day with the most extraordinary group of young women he had ever encountered, he realized that maybe crazy was exactly what the situation required. And he was still smiling. The second day began differently. When Marcus entered the classroom, he found the cadets already assembled and waiting, but their formation had changed. Instead of the defensive amphitheater arrangement from the previous day, They had organized themselves into a more collaborative configuration. Small groups clustered around holographic displays, engaged in animated discussions about tactical scenarios. Cadet Williams approached him as he set up his materials. "We've been analyzing yesterday's lesson," she said without preamble. "We identified 17 potential improvements to the assault plan we developed." Marcus raised an eyebrow. 17 improvements in one evening. 18, actually, Cadet Anderson interjected from across the room. Riley found another weakness in the power grid configuration that we missed yesterday. What followed was a presentation that would have impressed seasoned military strategists. The cadets had not only refined their original assault plan, but had developed 3 alternative approaches, complete with contingency plans for various failure scenarios. They had worked through the night, driven by an enthusiasm for tactical innovation that Marcus had never seen in a conventional classroom setting. But what impressed Marcus most wasn't their technical competence. It was their collaborative dynamic. These young women, who had been described as hostile and uncooperative by previous instructors, were working together with a level of coordination and mutual respect that most military units took months to develop. "This is extraordinary work," Marcus said when they finished their presentation. "But I have to ask, what motivated you to put this much effort into a training exercise?" The question seemed to surprise them. Cadet Martinez spoke up first. "It wasn't just a training exercise, was it? You said Command was interested in our tactical assessment for potential real-world applications." Marcus paused, realizing that his strategic lie from the previous day had been more effective than he had intended. These cadets had responded to being treated as professional consultants rather than students, and their work product reflected that elevated responsibility. "You're right," he said finally. "Command is very interested in innovative tactical approaches to complex scenarios. Your work yesterday demonstrated capabilities that go far beyond standard academy training." It wasn't technically a lie. General Vance had made it clear that Class Phoenix was being developed for missions that conventional forces couldn't handle. But Marcus realized he was walking a fine line between motivating his students and potentially misleading them about their immediate future. Cadet Tivara, who had remained silent during the presentation, finally spoke. "Instructor Thompson, may I ask about your own tactical background?" The question was delivered in the formal, measured tone that characterized her species, but Marcus detected an undertone of genuine curiosity rather than suspicion. "What would you like to know, Cadet Tivara?" "Your service record mentions the siege of New Jakarta and the Martian uprising, but provides few details about your specific role in those conflicts." Marcus had expected this question eventually. Class Phoenix was notorious for researching their instructors as thoroughly as their instructors researched them. "I was part of a special operations unit that specialized in unconventional warfare, situations where standard military doctrine was insufficient or inappropriate. Unconventional how? Cadet Williams pressed. Her tactical mind immediately focused on the operational implications. Marcus considered his response carefully. His actual service record was classified at levels that even these elite cadets couldn't access, but he could provide general information that might help them understand his perspective. We operated in small teams, usually 3 to 5 personnel, in situations where larger forces would be counterproductive. Our mission parameters typically involved scenarios where stealth, adaptability, and creative problem-solving were more important than overwhelming firepower. Like what we're being trained for, Cadet Anderson observed quietly. The insight was so accurate that Marcus felt momentarily off balance. These young women weren't just tactically brilliant. They were intuitive in ways that suggested capabilities beyond normal military training. "What makes you say that?" he asked. "Because nothing about our training profile matches standard academy protocols," Cadet Martinez replied. "We're being developed for something specific, something that requires capabilities that don't exist in conventional military units." The silence that followed was charged with intellectual energy, as 37 brilliant minds focused on a puzzle that they were only beginning to understand. Marcus realized that his students were rapidly approaching the same conclusions about their purpose that he had reached during his briefing with General Vance. "You're correct," he said finally. "Your training is preparing you for missions that conventional forces cannot handle. The question is whether you're ready to accept that level of responsibility." Cadet Williams leaned forward, her steel-gray eyes intense with interest. "What kind of missions?" Marcus looked around the room at faces that were no longer those of students seeking knowledge, but of soldiers demanding to understand their purpose. These young women had been shaped by trauma and loss into weapons of incredible precision, but they were also intelligent enough to recognize when they were being prepared for something beyond normal military service. "The kind of missions that determine whether civilization survives or falls," he said quietly. "The kind of missions where failure isn't just personal, it's apocalyptic." The weight of that statement settled over the classroom like a physical presence. For several long moments, no one spoke. Then Cadet Williams stood up, her posture shifting into the rigid attention position that characterized formal military acknowledgement. "Class Phoenix accepts that responsibility, Instructor Thompson." One by one, the other cadets rose to their feet, their individual acknowledgments creating a ripple effect throughout the room. When the last cadet had assumed the position of attention, Marcus found himself facing 37 of the most dangerous young women in the galaxy, all of whom had just committed themselves to a level of service that most people couldn't even comprehend. And for the first time since accepting this assignment, Marcus Thompson felt the full weight of what he was being asked to accomplish. These weren't just students. They were the future of military conflict, the thin line between survival and extinction. But as he looked at their faces, seeing determination and courage where previous instructors had seen only hostility and dysfunction, Marcus realized that maybe, just maybe, civilization had chosen its defenders well. "Then let's get to work," he said, his smile returning with renewed intensity. "Because the galaxy is counting on us to get this right." The training that followed was unlike anything in Academy history. Marcus threw out traditional instructional methodologies in favor of practical applications that challenged every assumption about military education. Instead of lectures, he created immersive scenarios that required real-time problem-solving. Instead of individual assessments, he developed team challenges that forced the cadets to integrate their diverse capabilities into cohesive tactical solutions. The results were extraordinary. Within a week, Class Phoenix was operating at levels that exceeded the performance parameters of veteran special operations units. Their tactical innovations were so advanced that Marcus began forwarding their work to actual military strategists for consideration in real-world applications. But the most significant development was the transformation in the cadets themselves. The hostile, suspicious young women who had driven 12 previous instructors to nervous breakdowns were becoming something else entirely. A unit of elite warriors who trusted each other implicitly and were beginning to trust their instructor as well. The change was most evident during their daily combat training sessions. Previous instructors had struggled to maintain order during physical training, as the cadets' individual competitiveness often devolved into conflicts that bordered on actual violence. But under Marcus's guidance, their competitive instincts were channeled into collaborative excellence that pushed each individual to perform beyond their previous limitations. "The key," Marcus explained to General Vance during one of their weekly briefings, "is recognizing that their competitiveness isn't destructive. It's how they demonstrate respect for each other. When Cadet Williams pushes Cadet Anderson to perform at higher levels, she's not trying to diminish Anderson's capabilities. She's acknowledging that Anderson is capable of more than she's currently achieving." General Vance reviewed the performance metrics that Marcus had submitted, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts. "Their improvement rates are unprecedented," she said finally. "But I'm concerned about their emotional attachment to you as an instructor. What happens if you're not available to guide them during an actual mission?" It was a valid concern, one that Marcus had been considering as well. The cadet's loyalty to him was becoming increasingly apparent, but that loyalty could become a liability if it prevented them from operating independently. "I've been working on that," Marcus replied. "The goal is to transfer their trust from me as an individual to themselves as a unit. They need to understand that their real strength comes from their collective capabilities, not from external guidance." And how do you plan to accomplish that? Marcus smiled, but this time his expression carried a hint of something that might have been mischief. By putting them in a situation where they have to succeed without me. The opportunity came sooner than Marcus had expected. A terrorist group calling itself the Liberation Front had seized control of a civilian transport ship carrying 300 passengers, including several high-ranking diplomatic personnel. The situation was delicate. Any military response that resulted in civilian casualties would create a diplomatic catastrophe that could destabilize the entire sector. Conventional military doctrine called for a lengthy siege, followed by a carefully planned assault that would minimize risks to both civilians and military personnel. But the terrorists had made it clear that they would begin executing hostages if their demands weren't met within 72 hours. Marcus received the emergency briefing at 300, along with orders to prepare Class Phoenix for immediate deployment. This wasn't a training exercise or a theoretical scenario. It was exactly the kind of mission that their unconventional training had been designed to address. When he entered the classroom to brief the cadets, Marcus found them already assembled and waiting. Someone, probably Cadet Williams, had accessed the emergency communication channels and gathered intelligence about the developing situation. "We know about the Stellar Princess," Cadet Williams said without preamble. "We also know that conventional assault teams have a 15% probability of success without significant civilian casualties. And we know," Cadet Anderson added, "that Class Phoenix has been specifically trained for exactly this type of scenario." Marcus looked around the room at faces that showed no trace of the anxiety or uncertainty that would be natural for students facing their first real combat mission. Instead, he saw calm determination and tactical focus that would have impressed veteran soldiers. "This isn't a training exercise," he said quietly. "The people on that ship are going to die if we fail. The diplomatic consequences of failure could lead to conflicts that claim millions of lives. Are you prepared for that level of responsibility?" "We've been prepared for it since the day we walked through those doors," Cadet Martinez replied. "The question is whether command is prepared to let us do what we've been trained to do." It was exactly the response Marcus had hoped for, but it also represented a moment of truth that he hadn't fully anticipated. These young women were ready to transition from students to operators, but that transition would fundamentally change their relationship with him and with the academy. "Then let's plan a mission," Marcus said, activating the holographic display system and pulling up the intelligence files on the hijacked transport. What followed was a planning session that demonstrated every capability that Class Phoenix had developed over the past months. They analyzed the ship's structure, identified potential entry points, assessed the terrorists' psychological profiles, and developed contingency plans for dozens of potential complications. But most importantly, they did it without requiring guidance or direction from Marcus. He found himself functioning more as a facilitator than as an instructor, helping them access information and resources rather than providing tactical guidance. The plan they developed was brilliant in its simplicity and terrifying in its complexity. Rather than a single coordinated assault, they designed a multi-phase operation that would use their diverse capabilities to maximum advantage. Cadet Tivara would use her telepathic abilities to gather intelligence about the terrorists' mental states and intentions. Cadet Anderson would create diversionary explosions that would draw the terrorists' attention away from their primary infiltration routes. Cadet Martinez would coordinate communications and tactical updates from a command position. But the most remarkable aspect of their plan was how it distributed leadership responsibilities based on situational requirements rather than rigid hierarchy. Each cadet would assume command of the operation during the phase that best matched her individual capabilities, creating a fluid command structure that could adapt to changing circumstances in real time. This is the most sophisticated tactical plan I've ever seen from a student unit, Marcus told them when they finished their presentation. But I need to ask you something. Are you prepared to execute this mission without me? The question seemed to surprise them. Cadet Williams frowned, her tactical mind immediately identifying the implications. Without you, you're not coming with us. The mission profile calls for a 7-person team, Marcus explained. Class Phoenix has 37 members. Someone needs to select the operational team and coordinate with Academy Command while the mission is in progress. It was a lie, but it was a necessary lie. The truth was that Marcus had been ordered to remain at the Academy during the mission, ostensibly to provide tactical support and coordination. But he understood the real reason. General Vance wanted to see if Class Phoenix could operate independently, without the emotional security blanket that his presence provided. The silence that followed was different from any quiet that had settled over the classroom before. This wasn't the hostile suspicion of their first meeting or the tactical focus of their planning sessions. This was the silence of young women realizing that they were about to face their greatest challenge without the instructor who had become their anchor in an uncertain world. Finally, Cadet Williams spoke. "We understand, Instructor Thompson. We're ready." But Marcus could see in her eyes, and in the eyes of her classmates, that they weren't ready for this particular separation. They were ready for the mission. Their capabilities and training had prepared them for that. But they weren't ready to do it without the first authority figure who had ever treated them with genuine respect and trust. Which was exactly why it was necessary. "I have complete confidence in your abilities," Marcus said, and meant every word. "You are the most extraordinary group of soldiers I have ever had the privilege to work with. The galaxy is fortunate to have you as its defenders." As the cadets filed out to begin their pre-mission preparations, Marcus remained in the empty classroom, processing what was about to occur. In less than 12 hours, 37 young women who had been discarded by conventional military thinking would be risking their lives to save 300 civilians they had never met. And if they succeeded, they would prove that everything Marcus had believed about their potential was not only correct, but probably understated. If they failed, the consequences would extend far beyond the immediate loss of life. Class Phoenix would be disbanded, its members reassigned to conventional units where their unique capabilities would be wasted. The Academy's experimental approach to unconventional warfare would be abandoned in favor of traditional military doctrine. But as Marcus gathered his materials and prepared to assume his role in the Mission Coordination Center, he realized that failure wasn't really a possibility he was willing to consider. These young women had overcome obstacles that would have destroyed ordinary people. They had transformed themselves from broken, suspicious individuals into a unified force of extraordinary capability. They were Class Phoenix, and they were about to remind the galaxy why that.